This is Ryan Black, and I'm going to be walking through this next assignment here, which is basically setting up a mix in Pro Tools. Some of the parameters that we are looking to make sure are implemented include having processors on our audio tracks, having a minimum of 3 sends to 3 different auxiliary tracks with different processors, probably temporal processors. Um, Having appropriate levels throughout our track, and then obviously mixing the track in a way that is appropriate and level, peaking somewhere around 3 to 6 decibels on the master fader, and then bouncing that out and packaging it correctly. So here's how we're going to do that. Labeling things correctly for this particular assignment. Make sure you always check where it's saved and your bit depth and your sample rate. We're going to import. Oops, wrong keyboard shortcut. Also wrong keyboard. Shift Command I will bring in our ability to import audio files. Yours will be wherever you downloaded those from, and mine will be right here. And you want to make sure you import all of those files, and you hit copy or convert to bring those files into Pro Tools. We're going to make sure they are saved in our audio files folder, and we're going to put them each on their own track. In this way, we should be ready to go as far as everything being zero aligned. The audio files, if you are prepping them for another person to mix, should be what's called zero aligned, which means they all line up when they are pulled all the way to the beginning of the timeline in your audio session. So if I zoom out here, you can see all of these start at 0 and play all the way to the end. So these are zero aligned audio files. The next thing I want to do is get these in order so that I can work with them and feel a little more comfortable. So anything that says drums, I'm going to move up to the top of my session, followed by bass, followed by guitar and keyboard, and then potentially horns, and finally vocals. So right now I'm being very Leslie is our organ, top and bottom. I'll put the top above the bottom. Lead vocals come down here. Key, here's our organs. Here's a room mic, which let's check and kind of see. So that's a room of the whole room. Either way, I'm gonna put my room mic here with my my drums, but that is not a drum room mic. That is a overall everyone's in the room rocking it out room mic. Baritone is a saxophone. Put those in order. So I've got trumpet, tenor sax, baritone sax, backing vocals, and lead vocals down there at the bottom. At the top, I've got drums. I'm going to start with my kick, then have my snare, and I like to do my hi-hat next so that those 3 primary elements are all next to each other. Toms you can put in here. These toms have a lot going on, even though they're picking up a lot of noise with the rest of the drum set, which you might deal with if you want. Drum overheads here is a stereo set. And then we have our room. We have bass DI, bass amp. Chamber is probably going to be a reverb chamber, which is great. So you have that. In this case, I'll put that next to this room mic. I might move those later, but those are going to be really important to the mix. And it's great that that's there. Electric guitar, just hanging out. Cool. And then we have amps Leslie, bottom, and trumpet, tenor, baritone. Now in this demo, I'm not going to actually sit here and mix for 6 hours in a demo. I'm going to set up the session for mixing. So this is stuff that I do to prep a session before I go to work. So the first thing I like to do is just visually I'll take a look, and I like to bring up things that seem low in level, like this amp part. This has nothing to do with this mix. It has everything to do with how plugins are built. So if I can have all of my files sort of sitting at a good level, they will interact with my plugins better, and that is ideal. In 24-bit, it's not about the noise floor, but it's actually about the algorithms. And so I've found that if I bring all my tracks up, nothing peaking at the beginning, while this might mean that the mix that was sort of built into the tracks that were sent to me gets ruined, I look at my job as one of mixing from scratch. I'm not throwing something in the microwave. I'm cooking a meal, if that makes sense. So when you come to the restaurant, you're getting my interpretation of this mix, what I think these instruments and parts should all do and how they should blend, not a reinterpretation of yours. Now, with that being said, as a client, with that being said, if a client specifically asks for that and they go, we really like this mix already, we just want you to clean it up, great. I'll do that. No problem. It's not an issue of whether or not I can do it. It's an issue of I think I end up with better results when I go for it. So now all of these levels are pretty much looking good, and I don't touch those automation gain plugin or those gain plugins here on Pro Tools again, unless I am doing automation, which would be much farther down in the process. Cool. We're gonna skip over here to our mixing window, select all of our tracks, and we're gonna start to build up our basic tracks with plugins. Some of you may know one of the things that I like a lot is a single band EQ across all my tracks. So I have everything selected, then I'm holding down Shift and Option, I'm adding a single band EQ, and I am in fact in this case going to bypass that. I will end up using that to get rid of low frequency content that I do not need, and I think this is vital and often overlooked. If you have a big session, this is a relatively large session, you don't need anything below 100 hertz, 125 hertz in your guitar or in your vocals or in your hi-hat mic. So get rid of that stuff because it can easily muddy up a mix pretty bad. We're going to stick with all standard Pro Tools plugins here, so channel strip across everything. Now you got to be careful because you want to make sure that it keeps stereo versions of that on your stereo tracks. So sometimes Pro Tools will get a little funky about this. In this case, it looks like it's done it correctly. Channel strip mono, that could be a problem on these stereo tracks. So I'm going to just grab these guys separately. I think it's just those three. Cool. We're just going to do those guys separately and get rid of this plugin. I'm holding down Shift and Option, so it's only applying this to that specific track. And I'm going to make sure I have stereo plugins on that track. I'm going to do the same thing here with the original one. It's probably appropriate, but I'm going to just make sure that I do have this correct. Boom. And then bypass those by holding down Shift, Option, Command, and clicking on the single band EQ. Next up, I'm going to add, actually move these over just to make things simpler. We're going to add just to those three stereo ones, but I'll do the same to a lot of other things in a second. 7-band EQ, and finally a compressor, which I will bypass. Dyne 3 is just the standard Pro Tools compressor. Boop. You can see it takes a while longer to load. A little more CPU intensive, I would think, but I don't know. Okay, now we do the same for all of the mono tracks. So holding down Shift and Option, selected the tracks, and now I'm coming in here, doing my extra EQ. I've just found I know this plugin very well, and it also does what it sounds like it's going to do. So I've found it very, very useful in that way. And then Dyne 3 compressor limiter. Recently, I've been using a lot more of the Console 1 setup, which I have that device, and that really has been it's been good, been fun. Allows me to mix, especially the rock stuff that I'm working on, really pretty fast. All right, we're going to go to our sends, and in this case, I'm a fan of using my mono sends. Oops, I missed. I don't have these guys all selected. So I'll do that. Boom, bus 1, bus 2, bus 3, and you might notice there are no actual, those don't go anywhere right now. So we'll go over there. We'll add new tracks. Shift Command N. We've got mono auxiliary tracks. We'll add 3 of those. You can see it says 3 mono auxiliary tracks. If we wanted, we could name them, and they'll be called something sort of useful. Verb 1, 2, and 3 in this case. And we'll also add Shift Command N, our stereo master fader. Boom. So now we got our master over there. Got to have a master. Got to have a send aux track for your sends. All right, now selecting my 3 sends, I'm going to set my inputs sequentially to bus 1, 2, and 3. So that on every track, if I want to add bus 1, I just go boop, and I turn up bus 1 on that track. If I want bus 2, click on bus 2, turn up bus 2 for that track, and it will be routed into that auxiliary channel. In order to do this sequentially, we hold down Shift Option Command. Click here, bus 1. So now it's bus 1, 2, bus 3. Awesome. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a group that is just all my audio tracks. Shift G, call this audio tracks. And this really is just so I can do this one thing right there. Just pull everything down about 10 decibels. I think it's really important not to start mixes with all your faders up at 0. They're all the same right now, but they're just lower a little bit, which means I have room to mix. It means I have headroom. Cool. And next thing we're going to set up is our actual effects here. So you can do what you want as far as appropriate effects, but something you might play around with is mono to stereo effects, which will give them a little more width. And I'm going to do, this is a pretty straightforward live track, so I'm going to do a like a room reverb, a plate reverb, and a stereo delay, so I can add sort of width to things as I want. So we'll go with the room. This medium room can be good. I'm gonna go with the little longer one on this, and I'm gonna leave the pre-delay off. I find Pro Tools pre-delay to be very obvious. It's not bad, but it's obvious. So if you want it, by all means, utilize it, but realize and really listen to what that pre-delay does. For the plate, a 2.5 or a little shorter usually works well, and I like to have a little bit of a pre-delay on that plate, and then we'll bring that in, roll off some of the high frequency content. But the other thing that I'll do on all 3 of these plugins is I will add a EQ, so I can modify the plugin frequency content as well. I just left that as it is for now. So I select those, Shift Option, and I'll add an EQ, 7-band EQ. So now I'm basically ready to go, and you'll see that lines up as well with my EQ across all my audio tracks. So it's always in the same place. I don't have to think too much. Next thing I'm going to do is go back here and color coordinate some stuff. Oh, I still have all my tracks selected, audio tracks here, so I'm turning off that group and then hiding that. And so I'm going to select, and I could turn these into groups as well, my drums, for example, and I like to make my drums dark blue. It's sort of alliteration. My guitars will end up being green. My vocals will end up being violet or bright red, that sort of thing. So right now they're all different, which can be useful, but I'm going to go with the dark blue, purple thing. We'll do that for our drums. These room and chamber I'm going to leave for the time being. My bass will be bright blue because it's bass and blue. My guitars and keys will both be green. Will all be green, and I'll shade the guitar a little bit differently than the keyboard, just so I can kind of see what's happening there. They're slightly different. It might not be as clear on your screen. Horns, I'm going to make, for the time being, I'm going to make them orange. Sometimes I will do organs in orange as well. And then my keys, I'm going to make my vocals, I'm going to make violet, and my lead vocal, I'm going to make like a bright pink red thing, so I can see that. So now going to my room stuff here, I just want a color that's not the same as other colors. So a dark yellow or something is fine. I'll play around with these later in the mix process. Now you could go and do the same thing here, but I don't know. If you want, go for it. You just adjust here, tracks and so forth. So if we wanted to make our drums dark blue, we can do that. Our room, we made like this yellow color here. Our bass and bass amp, we made a bright blue, I think like this one. The guitars all the way across to the Leslie were green. The trumpets and horns were orange, and the backing vocals were sort of a violet, with the lead vocal being much more of an with the sort of this violet color, and the lead vocal was much more of like an aggressive yellow. So there you go, and then you can make those super saturated or not very bright or super bright and play around with that. Whatever floats your boat, go for it. Switch windows with Command and the equal sign. I don't know the exact tempo on this track, and that's okay, but I like to figure out sort of what the tempo is if I can, and for that I have a metronome app that I'll just
Hey there, we
on.
are Turkuaz here at the Telefunken Studios.
Telefunken, they do a little intro. So it's about 74 here at the beginning. Then it actually slows down a little bit by the end. This does not have to be perfect, but there's my tempo. That way, if I add a quarter note delay or something like that, it will work. And at this point, we are basically ready to start getting our mix going. There's a couple more things in the assignment sheet that we want to make sure we hit, which is bus groups. I think I asked for 3 minimum in there. So if we want to do that, we go to our drums here. I like to put my drums on a bus 10 if I'm going to do a group. So this is 9 and 10 because it's a stereo group because we want to have panning. So so you can see right now I just applied that to my first channel, but I actually want it to all of my drums here. Shift and Option, and we'll apply this to all of the drums by holding Shift and Option, and then it applies it to our selected tracks. That way my drums now go to bus 9 and 10. If I wanted, I could have my bass go into a group. You can make it 11 and 12, etc. And that will be my bass group. My keys and guitar, if I want all of those to go to a group, make it 13, 14. My horns, I definitely want in a group. I find processing horns in group is great. And then you may or may not have backing vocals in their own group, or all the vocals in a group, or whatever that is. Like you might have all 3 of these in one group, or you might have a group for backing and a group for lead vocals. In a pop session, I would often have lead vocals have their own group because there might be anywhere between 4 and 20 tracks just of lead vocals that don't include the backing vocals. All right, and then I'm going to select this last track and add these, what is going to end up being aux groups. which will allow me to modify those differently. So I think we need 5 of these, and these are going to be stereo aux inputs. You can see they're added there, and you could color coordinate these to match as well. Drum group, command to the right will get you to the next one. Bass group, group. Next one will be guitar. Well, it's guitar organ group. I might make that 2 or 3 later. Oops. Sorry, I clicked out of there. And the next one would be horns, horn group. And the last one here would be backup vox group. I don't have a lead vocal group for this one because there's only one track. It's a live recording. And then I definitely would want to color these a little differently than the verb stuff. So it doesn't have to be anything specific at this time, but just so I can see those are different. The next thing I like to do is solo enable all of these tracks, and I'm doing that by holding down Option and clicking this solo button. That way when I solo something, you still hear through these tracks. They remain open, as opposed to it only soloing the thing that you've soloed. This is pretty useful. And now we're going to listen a little bit, kind of see what we got going on. And we're feeling pretty good about that. We'll just listen for a bit.
I see this life flash before my eyes. A million suns tend to hypnotize. Yeah, cactus make me crazy. I realize growing help to shrink me down to size. I realize.
I was trying to figure out what was going on there. I never set up my inputs to my groups here. So once again, Shift, Command, and Option, and I click on my inputs, bus, this time 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Aha! There we go. Now we got the drive. And if we just want to hear our horns, for example, and our rooms. Pretty cool. So the issue with groups like this is if you don't have something in groups now, you always hear it. So that's what we're hearing right now. Anyway, the last thing I think is important to mention here is before you do a bounce, so now you spend the next 3 to 5 hours mixing, making things sound great, adjusting, listening to every track individually, potentially editing the beginning and ends of your files, making sure that if you do have to go in and actually clean things up, that you're doing that in a way that's not distracting to the listener. And then at the bottom, if you do specific things that are noteworthy, put them down here in notes, whatever that would be. So if you, for example, created a bass track where you had tuned certain notes, you would want to make sure that you put that in the notes so that another engineer would be able to like go, okay, this is modified from the original recording. Got it. So I'm going to finish up doing some mixing, but for now, that is basically how to set up a session quickly and get ready, prep it for mixing, which is the next step and the most fun and the most creative part of this process.